Forced Entries, the Downtown Diaries, 1971 to 1973, shows more literary skill in craft than its much more famous prequel, the Basketball Diaries. But before the author, Jim Carroll, published either of these two books, while he was still a teenager, he made a name for himself as a precocious street poet, a kind of urban bard, which got him entree into New York City's chic, bohemian elite, peopled by the likes of the famous artist Andy Warhol, who Carroll worked for, selling tickets for his X-rated movie house, the rock star Patti Smith, who Carroll dated for a while, the beat writers Allen Ginsberg and William S. Burroughs, the dance critic Edwin Denby. Much of Forced Entries revolves around Carroll's interactions with such people. Bob Dylan makes a cameo in the book, and so does the much lesser known folk singer Phil Ochs, who Carroll credits with planting an artistic vocation in him at 14 years old. The English poet W.H. Auden also makes an appearance, as does the Catalan artist Salvador Dalí. Without a doubt, in Forced Entries, Carroll name drops with flair. However, the book's quality and entertainment value come from Carroll's ability to spin a yarn, to tell an anecdote with wry humor and vivid clarity. While the Basketball Diaries, published in 1978, is angry and cocky, Forced Entries, published in 1987, is ironic and resigned. While the Basketball Diaries ends on a depressing note, with Carroll strung out on junk and just wanting to feel pure, Forced Entries ends on a hopeful note. At bottom, the book is about how Carroll finally got the monkey of heroin addiction off his back in an attempt to save his writing. I suspect that drugs helped him produce at least the first drafts of his earliest and perhaps most impactful work, both by giving him material and by keeping him from overthinking the composition process. Drugs, I think, can enhance writing until they don't. They serve as a kind of shortcut to unself-conscious expression, but a shortcut that ultimately leads to stunted growth, because you're skipping the hard part. You're skipping the struggle, which makes you grow in lots of ways before you finally do learn to express yourself unself-consciously. Forced Entries, compiled after Carroll sobered up from entries most likely scribbled down when he was high, is an inconsistent book. There are some very weak entries, but there are also some excellent ones, and some killer lines. For example, here's his description of college: 4 years of a scrupulously washed cunt on your face. In case you're curious, he went or attended both Wagner College and Columbia, and he never got a college degree. And there's a great description of a bad poetry reading where he describes words dropping from the readers' mouths onto the carpet and squirming in circles like fumigated bugs. Or check out this summing up of how, despite his wild and careless living, he ends up with a girlfriend. It is as if I were riding a raft through rapids, and by a supernatural sense of timing and dexterity, she jumped onto it from a bridge as I passed beneath it, having followed it from above a long time before as it first came into view around a great curve, and she lands feet first, upright, like a cat. And then there is this wonderful entry about storms after he moves to California to kick the drugs. He describes how in California he watches nature perform during storms, while in New York he watches people react to them. There's this running theme of an abscess in his elbow that oozes and sometimes squirts green liquid, a lingering infection from years of shooting up that he takes too far in certain sections, but ultimately reins in to end the book memorably. In general, whenever the straightforward simplicity of his prose merges with his wild poetic imagination, the book lights up. There's this one brutally clear scene that takes place in a New York methadone clinic where this guy tries to drown his girlfriend by pushing her head in a fish tank, and Carol saves one of the fish that fall out of her hair after her head emerges, and she continues to fight this guy. Or there's this other passage in which Carol remarks on how violence is never like it is in the movies in slow motion, but rather breathtakingly fast. And then to prove it, he describes this car going through a red light and crashing through a storefront window in the time that it takes a greengrocer to weigh some fruit. The best stretch of prose in the book, about 20 pages long, is called Christmas with DMZ. DMZ, a character, is based on the artist Larry Rivers, whose kids Carol babysat and who Carol did untold amounts of drugs with. The scene is just a crazy New York yarn, an absolute riot, on par with any of Hunter S. Thompson's drug-fueled episodes. And it also got me down the rabbit hole of Larry Rivers, a fascinating guy and artist in his own right, with a great New York accent, as thick as Carol's. Made me wish that I lived in New York during that era so that I could have hung out with that wacky crowd. While the Basketball Diaries will probably always be the book that Jim Carroll is most remembered for because of its unself-conscious rawness, Forced Entries gives us a glimpse into the writer that Carroll might have become if he'd kept progressing. He wrote one other big book, or at least his publisher Viking touted it as a big book, the novel, The Petting Zoo, which was published posthumously in 2010, a year after he died at 60 years old, but he considered it unfinished. And I get the sense from what I've read that he wrote it out of obligation to fulfill a contract, and because he owed something like $100,000 in back taxes. It didn't get good reviews, and I'm kind of afraid to read it because I don't want to be disappointed. From the book jacket copy, apparently the book is about this artist who's all the rage in the 1980s New York City art scene, who one day sees a Velázquez painting. Velázquez, by the way, was born and raised in Seville in the early 1600s. I've lived in Seville for the last 20 years. He sees this Velázquez painting and is so blown away that he has a nervous breakdown and is forced to re-examine himself personally and professionally. If you've read it, please comment on it below. Maybe you'll convince me to read it. In the meantime, I am content with Forced Entries, which is about a different cutting-edge scene from one decade before in New York City, with Carol fighting real demons, while he receives a kind of preferential treatment and tries to realize his artistic vocation. Jim Carroll spread himself thin. In a way, his life was art as much or more than his writing. For example, check out the song People Who Died from the album Catholic Boy by the Jim Carrol Band. It's great. A lot of the people and their stories mentioned in that song first appear in the Basketball Diaries. It makes sense that he turned to music, the more popular medium. I mean, he got to play on stage with Lou Reed and Keith Richards. The song People Who Died was part of the soundtrack to E.T., one of the most popular movies of all time. Jim Carroll was a cultural figure as much as he was a writer. And let's be honest, that's part of the reason why we read him. A quick reminder, to support the cause, you can always like, comment, or follow, or if my passion and insights about literature make you curious about my own attempts at it, there is always My Half Orange, a story of love and language in Seville, published by Tortoise Books in 2023, about the 10 most transformative years of my life when I moved from New York City to Seville, Spain in 2005 met a local woman, and started a family with her without hardly speaking Spanish. I plan to soon upload an audio version to Substack, Rants from a Foreign Land, John Julius Reel. Follow me there to receive all my updates by email. Thanks, good people.